Hello, class. My name is Christopher Gutierrez, and my presentation is on Steve Biko and the Black Consciousness Movement. So, Steve Biko lived from 1946 until 1977. He unfortunately died very young, and he was the founder and the biggest proponent of the Black Consciousness Movement. He founded some other things, but mostly he was known for the Black Consciousness Movement. So, early life. Biko received his education initially in missionary-run institutions, which were educational institutions that were kind of by Africans, for Africans, and that was until 1953, when he was very young, that the Bantu Education Act was passed, and a lot of those missionary-run institutions, they actually preferred to close instead of teaching young kids within the confines of apartheid, as a lot of the stuff that the Bantu Education Act was pushing was racist, like from its birth. So they would rather not teach that than not teach at all than to teach that. His first biggest run-in with Bantu education was when he was 19, and he attended the University of Natal, which was actually a European-only, white-only university, but it did have a non-European section, and that is where Steve Biko attended. While he was there, he quickly realized that the education he was getting was not equal to that of his white counterpart, and that, as it did for many people his age in South Africa at the time, radicalized him and he began to look at those who came before him and what they believed, and he became inspired by the ANC, and what I thought was pretty cool, he got inspired by the Black Power movement in the United States. So I think to understand why the outcry against the Bantu Education Act was so severe, you have to understand what it was, and I think nothing else kind of captures that as well as this quote does. It's pretty heinous, and here it goes. There is no space for him, the native, in the European community above certain forms of labor. For this reason, it is of no avail for him to receive training which has its aim in the absorption of the European community, where he cannot be absorbed. Until now, he has been subjected to a school system which drew him away from his community and misled him by showing the greener pastures of European society where he is not allowed to graze. That is Dr. Hendrik F. Verwoerd. So I think what strikes me about this quote is just how inhuman the white South Africans looked at the black South Africans. The phrasing of greener pastures of European society where he is not allowed to graze is extremely racist, and kind of shows that they saw black South Africans as kind of animals that should work for them. And I think that's why Bantu education was severely unpopular and led to the radicalization of many African freedom fighters, whether those were militant fighters or just peaceful protesters. So, NUSAS and SASO. NUSAS is the National Union of South African Students. This is actually the organization that Biko joined when he first began to feel like, the education he was getting is not the education he wanted to receive. But the problem with NUSAS was actually the same criticism that the ANC got initially, in that it was trying to fight apartheid within the confines of apartheid. So they were trying to beat the broken system, but they were not leaving the broken system. So a lot of these young black students started to realize, apartheid has no system that will allow us to escape it. So you need to attack it from the outside. And that is what led Steve Biko to found the South African Students Organization, which is SASO, which took a very different approach. So SASO began to protest. And in 1972, SASO organized strikes of university students that led to 600 arrests of those same students. And in 1974, Sasso helped organize rallies to overthrow colonialism in neighboring countries Mozambique and Angola. I think that speaks to the level of power that Sasso reached, that Steve Biko founded an organization that was able to help fight colonialism in different countries. It's you know they were overthrowing governments in different countries. That's how powerful this organization kind of became. So Biko was actually banned by the National Party in 1973, and he was arrested on charges of fomenting terrorism, which was very common practice in those days. They framed it in a way where Biko was going against the government, and so he was a terrorist. But in actuality, what he was doing was fighting for his own freedoms within the confines of a government that did not recognize him as human. And after that, Sasso as an organization was actually banned in 1975 on all black campuses, which again speaks to just the effectiveness of the organization that Biko produced. It became kind of a nightmare for the National Party, which is ironic because in the beginning, the National Party misunderstood black consciousness, which was the ideology behind Sasso, and they misunderstood it as an apartheid support ideology. At first, black consciousness, might kind of sound like it's okay with apartheid because it's telling black people to be amongst black people, to kind of enjoy who they are as black people. But what it did not account for is that black consciousness emphasized that black people should not be okay with the confines that they are given by apartheid. The ideology can be simplified as follows. He argued that Africans should first look at themselves as people and then develop their ideologies from there. So what that kind of means is if you take a step back from the society you're living in and you recognize first and foremost that you are a human being, regardless of whatever skin color you have, you start to look at the rules and regulations that are around you, and you start to question whether those rules and regulations are recognizing you as a human being. And apartheid did not recognize any black South African as a human being. And so the ideology kind of focused on trying to get people to break out of those confines. Below is the slogan, "Black man, you are on your own." That is a common slogan used by those who were in the Black consciousness movement. And this symbol on the right, it has nothing to do with the Black consciousness movement. It is actually a Black Power symbol. But as I said earlier, the Black consciousness movement was heavily inspired by the Black Power movement in the United States. So here I have a couple of quotes which I thought were very powerful from Steve Biko. First is, "Blacks should work themselves into a powerful group so as to go forth and stake their rightful claim in the open society rather than to exercise that power in some obscure part of the Kalahari." So I think to understand that quote, you need to understand what Steve Biko thought a black person was. He defined a black person in South Africa as any person that was disenfranchised by the Afrikaner government. So that would mean people of Indian descent, people of Asian descent, black people. So he was arguing that these people who are disenfranchised should form a unified front, and then kind of break out of the confines of apartheid. Second quote is, "There is a mile of difference between preaching black consciousness and preaching hatred of white. Telling people to hate whites is an outward and reactionary type of preaching which, though understandable, is undesirable and self-destructive." So I think this is especially powerful because if there was a person or a group of people who had every right to hate the people that were disenfranchising them, it would be, Steve Biko and those in the Black consciousness movement. But even with the justification to say, these people should leave, these people, the Afrikaner government should be outside of South Africa, they didn't do that. They just wanted to live equally and peacefully. They wanted a fair shot. And I think that in itself is very powerful. Steve Biko was murdered by police on September 12th, 1977, after being arrested for terrorism. Um, so he was arrested and he soon after died. But the South African Minister of Police initially stated that he died while he was on a hunger strike. So basically trying to say it was his own fault. In reality, he was beaten and tortured by police and died in their custody. After his death, there was a worldwide outcry, including statements of outrage from entire governments, the governments of Ghana and Lesotho. There were riots in South Africa that unfortunately led to more student deaths. But I think such as, like, you can see what he meant to these people. And you can find photos if you want to of what he looked like after he died. I preferred not to. They are pretty gruesome. Instead, we have here is people protesting after his death and stating that they want justice. And you can see just the group of people there. Those are people that, loved him, loved what he stood for, and wanted to see justice for him. And I think that's a lot more powerful than looking at him after he was brutally murdered by racist people. And then the legacy of Steve Biko. So he unfortunately died before he was able to see any of the changes that he fought for his whole life. But where most people recognize Nelson Mandela in his own right, obviously he was an amazing man, and he's the most famous of those freedom fighters in South Africa. The people like Steve Biko who died before they were able to see what happened can kind of have their heroism live on, because apartheid did fall. F.W. de Klerk unbanned the ANC. He freed Nelson Mandela, and South Africa held its first free elections beginning on April 26, 1994. These were 4-day elections because of the sheer amount of voters that turned out. 91% voter turnout, which, like, the United States can only dream. And then those elections led to the ANC being elected as Congress, and then the ANC in turn elected Nelson Mandela to become the first black president of South Africa. And that's it. Thank you.